Hello and welcome. I am so glad you have joined me today. Well, you know the old saying, in divorce, there are three sides to every story. There's her side, his side, and the truth. Well, many times we focus on the wife's perspective, but what if we explored divorce from the husband's perspective? What if we attempt to understand his emotions, his pain, and his motives? Well, listen in as Dr. Bernadette Atanga, a physician, speaker, and leadership coach with more than 30 years of experience in internal medicine and pediatrics with special interest in emotional health and cultural, and she is the author of Beneath the Armor, 8 Practical Strategies for Men to Embrace Vulnerability and Lead with Authentic Strength. She'll share her unique insight with us today. This is the Silver Divorce Podcast, broadcast from the Whitfield Media Group studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Please follow this show and share it with people you know who are facing divorce. We are proudly brought to you by our title sponsor, the Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics, and show sponsor, Medicare Misty. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is the area's leading provider of multi-specialty orthopedic care. Using innovative surgical techniques and technologies, our team of specialists deliver exceptional results backed by exceptional patient care. Learn more at sportmed.com. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at medicaremisty.com. And I'm your host, Lisa McCluskey, and now let's podcast. Welcome, Dr. Atanga.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. And I'm so excited that you are addressing this very important topic for men. So thank you.
Well, I think it's long overdue. We know that divorce is often thought of as a male-driven event. And it seems as though men move on to new lives without a look back. And what we're learning is that's not true in every case. That's not the rule in every case. Divorce can be exceptionally challenging for men. It can lead them to also experience feelings of grief, loss. They might have a disruption in their identity as well. There's emotional fallout for them as they grieve their loss over their roles in the family. And sometimes it leads to depression and loneliness. So it's a great time for us to take a step back and also look forward as we deepen our understanding of divorce from the husband's perspective.
Yes, that is really important. I think you touched on very important points that we're going to expand on, and especially in your group, which is Silver Divorce. I think that holds especially true.
It does. We know that, women are more likely to file first, but often that is because there's been a long lead up to it, and there are men who are blindsided and are suffering. So we need to explore their emotions and see where we can help them. But before we dive in, I do want to talk about your initiatives because you have led some international mental health and some empathy-driven leadership initiatives, and your focus has been on men and men's workshop. So can you tell us, start with that. Let's delve into why you have an emphasis on men's emotional health and their leadership.
Yes, and it is interesting that this actually was an accidental find. And as you said in your introduction, I am an internist and a pediatrician by training. And I was born in Cameroon, that is in Africa, and I lived there until age 18. And I did my medical school training in Italy before moving to the United States to specialize. What I found when I was in medical school was this aspect of mental health that growing up was not talked about. It was not known in our community. So through my medical school training, I realized that there is a gap. That's an area I can help my community. And my focus was actually children. because of what we didn't realize that were traumatic, emotionally traumatic things for children and how that affects them as adults. And the only way I thought of helping men, because alcoholism or abuse of alcohol is great in my community, but as I started talking to adults about children's trauma, that is when I realized that talking to men's groups, because I thought they were the ones with the power, they started listening not to the children's stories that I brought to them, but I realized they were connecting to their own childhood emotions and started asking me for help in a way that nobody had presented that opportunity for them. So I thought this was a third world issue, but through my practice in the last 25 years in the United States, I realized that men were also communicating those feelings to me as they went through life and the changes in life in a way that they didn't talk to their spouses about it, and especially when they were going through divorce. So that is how I found that men also needed that space that they did not have.
Well, that's really powerful that you're telling them stories of the children. It reignited their own feelings of what they went through in their childhood and prompted them to realize they needed more, and they were seeking more from you than they probably would anybody else in their circle.
Yes, and I also realized that when you gave them space, they were willing to talk in a way that they wouldn't want to go to therapy. That was the also interesting thing, that they felt comfortable talking in the office. And I was blessed that I came into medicine when we embraced multidisciplinary care. So in the same office, we had mental health specialists. And yes, by training, medical school training and specialty training, we do train in psychiatry to handle, the basic needs of our patients and some therapy. But I realized that patients did not like referral to mental health. And I think at some point we were encouraged to do further training, like in cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that. And that's why I wrote the book, Beneath the Armor, is because I wanted something for men to feel comfortable with and still get the help they need, an introduction to that journey, and encourage them that you are normal, you're not alone, and that there are many people going through this journey, and that yes, therapy is a good thing. And because the book also is formatted in relationship style, whether it's work relationship or family relationship, and the people that are affected.
Okay. Well, you speak a lot about leadership from the family room to the boardroom. And can you talk about what that means and why you think that's important to connect the two?
Yes, I did that especially for men. Why? Because our world is led majority by men, families are led by men, workplace is led by men. And even when we have women in leadership, we go back home to a family setting that is structured for male leadership. And what we have done, and why I focus on that, is because we find a lot of men who are successful in their careers, but in their private lives, they are falling apart. And one of the things I noticed was successful men in particular who are blindsided by divorce. I mean, when you talk about blindsided,
right,
you mentioned that if you look at it, silver divorce, a lot of times are initiated by women.
Yes.
And the women are ready to move on. The women have a life that they have created for themselves. And that is when the grief for men is real, for when they through silver divorce, because they go through those emotional fallout, depression, loneliness, as you mentioned before. And so they notice that failure in leadership at home, because it's not only the divorce, the loss of the spouse. A lot of times it's also the loss of the children, that even if they're adult children, that they and we're talking about good men. So I'm not talking about men who did something horrible. We're talking about good men who thought they did everything right. They worked so hard for 30 years for their families, not realizing that They were not leaders at home. They did not connect with their children or their spouse. They provided the exotic vacations. They provided the luxury, but they were not leaders in terms of the relationship. They were not part of that unit. And that's why it's important that I talk about leadership from the boardroom to the family room, because people don't realize that at home, it's not just your needs that have to be met. You have to be present. You have to be a leader. And that gives you an all-round success. And if men think about it that way, we probably might have less and less silver divorces.
Right. So that's interesting. Do you think that what I hear you say is they're almost abdicating leadership when they get home? They may be leaders at work or they have a business, but when they get home, that's not the case. What do you think leads them to make that, to flip their personality almost in that way, to go from I'm a leader at work and then when I get home, I'm not leading my family?
I don't think it's an intentional flip as much as it is a cultural programming. And that is why when I talk about this men's empowerment, it's all of us as a culture. We need to look at how we have raised men from when they were little boys. How do we define their roles? You define a man as a provider, primarily, or a protector. And so when they get into that position, and if you look at in some cultures, how do women pick a spouse? You pick a spouse that can provide. Mm-hmm. And so if a man meets that goal, then he knows he's taking care of his family. And as long as he's providing and his own basic needs are met, his laundry is done, food is provided, sex is provided, then he thinks life is good. But they don't realize what is my role, my leadership role in this family, whether it's in education, in how I evolve in teaching my children, involved in homework, just those other things that make you a true leader at home. I don't think we define that for men. And so they are going, and then the other thing was, when you look at silver divorce, we're now talking about baby boomers. Mm-hmm. How did they grow up? Who were their mothers? Their mothers were probably stay-at-home moms, and it was a different dynamics. And the only formal training that we have for marriage is the family that we come from or the environment that we come from. But if you look at the silver divorce people, who are their spouses? They are probably working spouses. And so that relationship and that dynamic is different in a way that these baby boomers were not prepared for. They did not get that handbook.
Yeah, if you look at the 70s and 80s, that's really when the percentage of women in the workplace started to increase dramatically. And do you feel, or do you see that as that occurred, women looked for men to take on more of a leadership role as they were in the workplace as well, but yet perhaps did the men think, well, my wife is really more of the leader and I'm more of the leader at work and she's at home. Do you think that played into it?
Well, now we have more women who also became providers. And to be a leader, I think we have to define that in every relationship. It takes different forms. And leadership is also, it's partnership, right? So between every couple decides how they're going to partner in this relationship. And I tell people, if you look at your family, especially men, as a business or as a corporation, right? You have the CEO, you have the COO, you have the CFO. And before, maybe the leadership, the man was all of those things in the relationship, was the provider, he did the finances, there was the generation that women didn't know how bills were paid, how money came in, if they were in debt, if they were not in debt. But now you have a spouse who maybe makes more than you do, a spouse who is a finance specialist, so she can run the accounts better than you do. But then, so how are you a leader in that role? You had the generation where the men did not go into the kitchen. But now you have men who grew up, maybe they are a chef, they love to cook, they probably cook better than their wives. So again, leadership looks different in every relationship, but it is something that has to be discussed, and it is a partnership. And so what I say is we empowered women to advance their careers, to advance their assertiveness, to redefine who they are or what it means to be a woman in this new world. We never did that for men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you were talking about that, I was thinking of over time in a marriage, though the roles change dramatically. And how often do people sit down and talk about it? I don't recall. I was married 34 years, and I don't recall, even at the beginning, sitting down and saying, okay, how are we going to operate as a married couple? Who's going to be the CFO and who's going to be the CEO? We didn't do that. So is that something that you recommend that couples should do regularly, have those conversations?
Oh, yes. I do talk to people about those because, again, things change. The amazing thing is
Right.
it's more difficult running a family, leading a family effectively than it is an organization. Because an organization has very set goals that may or may not change over time. The outcome, the bottom line is finance. And then management seems, very structured. That's the reason why, just to switch here, women who work, in the office, I say have an easier time than stay-at-home moms. And every time I hear a woman tells me, my patients, oh, I'm just a stay-at-home mom, I make it a point to have that conversation of it is not just a stay-at-home mom. It's a difficult work because running a home changes. You have a plan today. You wake up, a kid is sick, and everything changes. Now it's an emergency, you have to go to the hospital. But everything else that you had to do still has to be done. So that is where you say, what does it mean to be a leader at home? You have to constantly discuss those things. You may marry beginning, and then it becomes, well, a caregiver role comes in that you did not anticipate for an aging parent or an aging grandparent. That was not part of your marriage when you signed up. And so when you talk of silver divorce, the things that happen during the course of that marriage are not discussed formally. How are we going to handle this? Especially now, silver divorce sometimes it's a mixed marriage. It may be the second marriage. You may have children, step-grandchildren, and how we navigate all those relationships have to be discussed with honesty.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that as a woman rises in her career in the workplace, that a man starts to feel somewhat emasculated or less than a man?
That happens with men that were not empowered. And I say that because, now what does that mean? A man who understands what we're talking about, what it means to be a real man. A man that does not only define themselves by whether they make more than the woman or whether they have a higher level of education. That's an empowered man. And I can say that because I grew up with a father who allowed my mother to reach for the skies. However, he never felt less than a man. Mm-hmm. People did say that to him. This was a culture where to be a man was defined by how many wives you had, legal wives. So that was a sign of wealth and how submissive your wives were. So for his generation, my dad passed 7 years ago. He was 104.
Oh, wow.
So that tells you, yeah.
Yes.
So for his generation at that time in Cameroon, Africa, for a man to choose to have just one wife and elevate her on a pedestal who did not seem to have any, she was free to do whatever she could do, whether it was her business, whether it was initiatives, travel, run as a beauty queen at that time and won twice and then they were partners in business. It was a lot of people said he had a woman that was controlling him. But that was because he was an empowered man, and he taught us what it meant to respect a woman in all her glory. Now, men who don't have that kind of background might feel intimidated or emasculated, and what happens that they don't realize is jealousy creeps into that relationship. They may want to sabotage their wife's success, and that also goes both ways. But because we're talking about men, I'll focus on that. And so, yes, some people feel intimidated, they feel less than, and the only way they know how to equalize that and feel like a leader is to, bring you down.
That's interesting. It's somewhat societal pressure as well. It sounds as though even though a man may be very proud and want to celebrate his wife, the society is telling him your woman is controlling you, and then he has to react to that.
Yes, and a lot of men do face that pressure. And if you look at it, even look at our young boys, look at college life, sometimes some of the unfortunate things that happen, between relationships and to young women, it's actually pressure. Or even teenage years. Young men are pressured to, who is going to have sex with who and how many girls you're going to have sex with. So there is that societal pressure that we don't teach men that you are going to face, and this is how you should handle that. And this is why your peers try to do that. It's just because, misery likes company. And if you chose to be different, you're going to be laughed at, you're going to be called names, but you have to be stronger than that. And that holds through the cycle of life. Marital life, the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. And it comes down to communication, as you've said several times. I want to just dive in now let's talk about the actual particulars of the divorce process for men. And we've mentioned that women are more likely to file than men. And we've also learned that a woman will take up to 2 years to finally take that step, that there's a long period of time where she's not happy, things are not going well. From the man's perspective, if they are aware of problems, do you think that they operate on autopilot, that maybe they're not fully aware of the problems, but they're just going on with their lives thinking that it will go away? What do you see as a typical man's response during that long period of time where there's some unhappiness going on and maybe they're living like roommates and they're not really connected emotionally or physically?
Yeah, so as I was preparing for this podcast, a lot is based on my experience with men that I work with. So I decided to reach out to a few divorce attorneys just to see if there was something different that I was missing. But the recurring theme is that men feel blindsided. Always. And that is what I heard also from my patients. And that's why I always would ask when, definitely I would see them because of a medical condition. Either they're not sleeping well, their blood pressure is not under control, they feel stressed, anxiety, whatever mental health issues accompany that. And then when you dig deeper, then you find out they're going through a divorce. And when you ask the question, and this is after 25 years or 30 years, and when you ask the question, who filed for divorce? It's the wife. And this is, physically you can see how devastated they are. And they would say, I thought everything was going on fine. I thought we had a good life. And I would, without asking, I know for sure it wasn't. Your wife wouldn't be filing for divorce, right? So I think it is that men communicate differently. And I think we don't teach each other. So, we don't teach women how men communicate, and we don't teach men what to pay attention to. When a woman says this is important, because men don't know how to handle their own emotions, let alone your emotions, then they just check out. And like some of the attorneys told me, men feel as long as their needs are met, laundry is done, there is food, and they have sex, then they've got a good relationship. because society conditioned men to disconnect their heart from their physical needs.
Mm-hmm. And we don't talk about it as a couple.
No, but women do talk about it, I would say so. A lot of times you would hear men say, "Oh, my wife talks too much." And the question I would ask is, what does she talk about?
Oh, but are you listening?
Yeah, yeah, because you hear that, it's a recurrent theme in multiple cultures. Women talk too much. And the question is, what are they talking about?
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's because we talk using emotional language, and that is they talk using logical language? They're more cut and dry logics, and women are more emotional, and perhaps we overtalk to a point where maybe they just tune out because it's over burdensome, would you say?
I think we overtalk, and it might be because when we are not heard the first time, we think we need to make it louder.
Mm-hmm. We say it over and over.
We need to say it over and over. And on the other side, it's like, okay, if I didn't hear it the first time, or if I didn't want to hear it the first time, then I'm really going to tune out.
Right.
So I think we have not been taught, both men and women, how to communicate effectively. And that's what therapists do. So when people finally, those who are privileged enough to find themselves in the office of a therapist, both of them, then they get that help. But a lot of times people don't, or by the time they get to the stage of divorce, one person has already completely checked out. And that's the other thing with silver divorce. Mm-hmm. The woman is ready to go. She's gone. That's not the time to want to work it out.
Mm-hmm. She's taken a long time to make that decision.
Yes.
And she's not reversing it at that point. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then when that does happen and that divorce bomb goes off, how do they typically, men, process that news? What's their normal reaction?
Well, there is the shock. There is this feeling of betrayal, especially if they find out the woman has already moved on with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So now, which often happens, and then now it becomes, she was cheating on me. And that is, they look at that now as the reason for the divorce. She found somebody else. She was cheating on me while I was working. But they don't realize the cheating or the other relationship is just a symptom of what was an underlying disease in the relationship.
I'm sorry, I've talked to quite a few people, therapists and physicians, and that is a very common theme, that cheating is a symptom of something else. So I'm glad that you said that.
And then the other thing they will do, like you said, which I have seen, that is the time. So for the woman, the divorce filing is the end of the relationship. For the man, that is the beginning of the problem. That is when they want to engage to save this marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, two distinctly different approaches. She's done. I've signed. The ink is dry. I am moving on. And he sees it as a promissory note that we could fix this.
Yeah, we can fix this. This is the time you want to work on it. And that is also because, like workplace, men are trained for crisis management.
That's true.
So they recognize a crisis. That's when they engage. Women are more solve the problem as you go along, stop it from becoming a crisis. For the most part, not every woman, but we're talking in generalization terms here. When it comes to relationship, it's different for everybody, but for the most part. And so because men are typically or stereotypically crisis management people, and you have other cases where, not every man is like that, but that divorce, that is the beginning of the crisis. That's when they want to engage. One of the things I found out from my lawyer friends as I was preparing from this, it's like, though I said, what advice do you give your men? It said, make a decision. And he said because what he realizes with men in this stage is they go forward and backwards. Or, well, they want the divorce, then the next day they want to fix it, or they want to get back with her and then make a decision. Because, and the example he gave, he said, it's like you open your refrigerator and you take out the milk and it's sour. It's bad. And then you put it back in the refrigerator and you try to drink it. He said, no matter how long you keep going back to that milk, it's already sour milk. It's not going to change. And I told him, I said, you know what? I'm going to use this analogy. I said, I'm going to use this analogy. So that's what he tells them. So that's something I did not realize.
Yeah.
I've seen that in some of the men I've worked with, where because they are confused, they're still in love and they want the relationship. But I didn't realize that also in the divorce process, they cannot make up their mind. 1 minute they want it, they want the divorce, the next minute they go back. And like he said, in his years of practice, rarely does it work going back. And it's
Right.
rarely. So, because most often she's done. And the other thing is, whatever the reasons that led her to file for a divorce in the first place, when you get back with her, she's expecting now that you're going to work on those things. But when you get back, the man feels, okay, we're back together, so we're good.
Oh, yes. I can see that, where she thinks, okay, he's committed, he's willing to change and work on things. And he's like, whew, got through that one. Things are going to be okay.
Got an injury that just can't wait? There's no need to delay your care. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is excited to announce that our Urgent Ortho Walk-In Clinic is now available on Saturdays at the Gun Barrel Road location. Open from 8 to noon, we're here to treat sprains, strains, fractures, and more. No appointment needed. So skip the long ER wait and get specialized orthopedic care fast. Visit us this Saturday at Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics Urgent Ortho. We're the center for expert care right when you need it. Learn more at sportmed.com.
So I have to wonder, you mentioned that, many times when she's finally filed, it's because she has somebody else. For a man, does the competitiveness or the possessiveness kick in where they want her back because that's their woman, and not necessarily because they covet the marriage and the time that they've spent together? Does that factor in it?
It is different for different people. Some respectful men just take it as a loss. I've lost. She's already gone. There is nothing I can do about it. I've heard some men say that. Some people who are extremely jealous might say, it's mine, and if I can't have her, nobody's going to have you. And that's where we get into the space where the most dangerous time for a woman in a relationship is when she's leaving.
Yes.
Because that can actually lead to bad outcomes in terms of safety.
We've had a couple of incidents here in our region where very bad outcomes happened when somebody was trying to leave a spouse. Yeah. So it is something that women need to be very aware of is how they're exiting the marriage and the circumstances.
We have the extreme also where when you talk about emotional fallout, for some men, it is such a defeat that it may lead to depression, loneliness, and even suicide. We've had a lot of that. Is also a very vulnerable group for suicide, especially professional men. And again, because it has to do with identity. So it's really complex. So it is different for different people how they view themselves as a man, what that relationship meant to them, what it means for the woman to have moved on with another man. And for some men, they handle it differently also. What they would do is they get involved in serial relationships, and to them it's a way to communicate to the woman, oh, I didn't need you, I'm still desirable, and I have all these women. But in as much as they have all these women that they are flirting around with, they are still really in love with their wife. And somehow in their mind, they think, if I show up with this woman, then my wife is going to come running back to me. Sometimes it happens, sometimes not. But I think it's just maladaptive coping mechanisms for people who have never been trained on communication in a relationship.
Right. And you're not trained in how to manage divorce either.
Nope.
For silver divorce especially, you've been together 20, 30 years. You've never been through it before, so you're kind of in native territory. This is all new. Do you find, I wanted to talk about how men process with their close friend group. What do you see as the norm for that? Do they process with their friend group, or do they feel like they don't want to hear about it, or other men just aren't really capable of engaging and it's very surface? What's your perspective on that?
No, men have fraternities. They will talk about everything, but not this one.
Okay.
So they don't, and that is actually the reason why, it is important that we have this conversation in the community. And that's why I wrote the book, and I'm starting this like beneath the armor community, which actually there is. I created a Facebook community, so for your listeners, they can join. It's Beneath the Armor. You can find that on Facebook, because men need community. So yes, he would sit at the bar. His friend would offer him a drink or two or three until he's drunk without asking, and they know what he's going through, but they don't want to talk about it. One, because they don't know what to say. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to help them out of it. See, women, we are different. A woman can meet another woman at the bus stop, and it doesn't matter whether they are two homeless women or two professional women in business class on a plane. But in the next 30 minutes, they can share everything from their husbands, their children, their work, their headache, total strangers, with no expectation of being friends after that journey ends.
Right,
but
that's
they
so
have,
true.
But they've provided therapy to each other. Men can be friends for decades, from their fraternity in college to, club, community club, that the word I'm looking, country club.
Country club.
From their country club to now I actually engage with the retired men's groups. They will talk about everything. They can talk about sports. They can talk about all of that. They will not sit heart to heart and talk about what is actually going on in their lives. But that is changing, because when I meet men and they see what I'm doing and they read the book, they're like, we really need this. Mm-hmm. Or I'm gonna see if you can come talk to our men. We know this is going on, but we really don't know how to talk about it. So I think it's not that they don't want to talk about it, they don't know how to talk about it.
So do you think that is why some men give really harmful advice? I've heard from a divorced friend who said that his friends did what you said, took him to a bar and bought him drinks, and their advice was go out and sleep with as many women as you can. That's how you get over it and move on. Do you think that that's why the extent of the advice or this talking about it is so shallow? They just don't know how, and they haven't been trained.
Well, they're trying to help first and foremost, and they don't know that that's shallow, or that's not going to be helpful, or that's only going to make things complicated. Every person does what they use, the tools that are in their toolbox. Mm-hmm. And for generations, this kind of behavior is what has been in their toolbox. So no, I don't think that they intended to give harmful advice. They just use the tools in their toolbox. Mm-hmm. And I think it's our responsibility as a culture to empower men and provide them with different tools on how to face these situations. First of all, to have the courage to face it, because it takes courage to admit that I feel something that culture has taught you not to feel. So, what do we tell men? The only emotions that we allow men to show and associate with manhood is anger, aggression, in the workplace, we call it being assertive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but if it is a woman, we call it aggression.
Yes.
So we women have been given different vocabulary, and when the negative for a man has been labeled positively, so we say they're assertive. We don't say they're aggressive, they're mean.
Mm-hmm.
They're not a mean boss, right?
Right.
And so,
Yes.
so when a man feels anger and he feels rage, he does not know how to express that in those terms, because what he is feeling is real, but he has been programmed not to embrace it, even though it is natural.
That makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of work to do as a society.
It's a societal problem.
It really is.
I don't think it's a man's problem. And when you talk about this issue about, men advising their friends to go out and sleep with many women, it reminds me of a documentary I had followed in England. This was in the mid-'80s. I was in medical school in Italy, and I would spend vacations in England. And so in the mid-'80s, this lady, she would have been at least 80 years old or more, and she was being interviewed. And she talked about how in their time you had to be a virgin when you got married. He said the men were not virgins, they had their experiences. I mean, I just want to take you how far back this goes. Men were allowed to go out and have sex with prostitutes and things like that. When I was in Italy, it was a culture, rite of passage. When a boy turned 18, they took him out, friends took him out and got a prostitute. So just think about how far back this has gone. So what it is men used to marry early, right? There is when you look at 16, 17, right at the time when their hormonal urges were peaking, they got married, and so they got a wife. That also explains why a lot of wives faced, rape even within their marriage, but you couldn't say it that way because it's your husband. So that culture of men always having women and multiple to satisfy their sexual urges is not new. It is cultural. But we live in a generation where men are getting married later. And so think about what is happening to boys late teenage through college. Look at what is happening to their sexual behaviors in relationship to women. We're having a lot of rapes. When you look at marriages where men work and they don't spend time at home because of work schedule, what is happening to their sexual urges? If you talk to career prostitutes, and I have spoken to some even when I was in Italy, you would be shocked of who their clients are and how much money they pay. So this whole thing, that advice is not new, is that for generations men have been taught to solve their problems through sexual expression.
Mm-hmm. And is that one reason why the prevalence of porn has increased so much?
Most definitely, because not only increased so much, it has ruined relationships.
Oh, yes.
Because then what you get from that fantasy is not what you're going to get at home. So that is a whole different podcast.
It is, yes. That truly is. So I know before my divorce, if I had a male colleague that shared that he was going through divorce, which usually they don't, it's very rare. You had to have a pretty close colleague friendship for them to disclose they were going through a divorce. It's like they're not allowed to have the same emotions, or they felt like they were not allowed to have the same emotions. How can we as women, if we have somebody who is in a work relationship or a friendship and we know they're going through a divorce, how can we support them and help them get through the journey without being at risk for, as you mentioned, suicide or the extreme loneliness or the grief? What should we be doing?
First, let them know they are not alone. And secondly, just listen. Because sometimes people don't For men, they don't have space to even speak. So even creating space for them is important. Second, just listening. Sometimes people don't look out for you to give advice. They just want to talk. And third, I am a big fan of therapy. Have them get a therapist. So I would send everybody to therapy. I believe in therapy for anything and everything. And also let them know they don't have to do it with their spouse. Therapy is not to fix the relationship, it's just to help you go through what you're going through, to manage your emotions, irrespective of the outcome. Because sometimes people think, okay, we need to fix this relationship. My wife doesn't want to go to therapy. No, she doesn't have to, because you have no control over her. You have to navigate this healthily, and therapy is going to help you deal with yourself, your own emotions, and how you engage with her.
Therapy is for you. So, and I always like to remind the audience, because this is a silver divorce, and people who are in the older years, Medicare does pay for therapy sessions. And so you can take a look at, if you're still working and you have insurance, most of them will cover it, but there are many ways that you can get therapy and be supported financially by it.
Yes, and I would add to that, even creatively, and as a physician, sometimes men don't want to be referred to for depression or because they're going through a divorce. So there is another way, stress. Stress is something that they would, that's a diagnosis, or just adjustment. So, you don't have to, because they don't want the conversation to come out as a divorce or whatever, or referral for a divorce. I've referred people just for stress, and for anxiety, or whatever, and they may be depressed, but they don't want depression on their record. But it is situational depression, it's grief, and that's the other thing people don't realize, that when we talk of grief, it's not just for a death, it's a loss, and people go through grief when they're going through a divorce. So there is also referral for that. Insurance would cover grief. They would cover some insurances. So there are many ways to label this outside of, so it's a divorce, but it is creating other medical and mental health conditions that are covered by insurance, or most insurances.
Yeah, I believe that when my physician referred me, she used stress as the reason. So, and adjustment, stress and adjustment. So, yeah, absolutely, you don't need to disclose that it is depression or divorce. There are many ways to be referred, so that's great. One of the things I also wanted to ask is, what other ways and what other steps can a man take to recover and heal from divorce, in addition to therapy? What are some things that he should be doing?
Well, we have to look at what they have available to them. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier, as we talked about, when we talked about the workplace, you see there are women in the workplace. Now, in the workplace, people are so busy with work, and these days, everybody's overburdened that there is not even time for conversation. I think it is important for employers to provide space. And there are wellness programs. In fact, some of the things that I do is coaching through wellness programs for corporations. And that's from leadership, from the boardroom to the family room. Now, people don't get involved in therapy and things like that. What I do is just open that conversation for people to look beneath their armor and find what it is that is preventing them or standing in the way of their emotional wellness. And the emotional wellness, or being emotionally unwell, are some of the things or behaviors that affect the relationship at home. And so what people can do ahead of time is not wait for them to go through a divorce, is what can we do to prevent those things from happening? And that is where corporations can provide, wellness retreats, which they do. They do have retreats, but I don't know if they focus. I would say they are beginning to bring that, because I was just so amazed. I'm giving a keynote worked for a corporation sometime this year, and it's about hormonal changes in men through their career, from their early years of their careers to retirement, and how that affects their behavior in the workplace. So I was just so excited because I told the organizer, usually I am the one pushing my agenda into businesses, letting them know this is important, but this was the first time that I was provided that topic. So I think things are changing, and more corporations can do that. Books like the one I wrote, Beneath the Armor, 8 Practical Steps for Men to Embrace Vulnerability and Lead with Authentic Strength. Those are easy read books. And so men can do what women have always done. So learn from women's playbook, because women would take a retreat to Bali all by themselves. Yes. The women would go to the spa, and I think men are doing. I love it every time when I go to the spa and I see a man there, for himself. He's not just sitting in the waiting room waiting for his wife to be done. So I think more and more men are embracing that. I think even though we're talking about silver divorce, I think the younger generation of men are embracing therapy more. And I think because their parents put them in therapy when they were a kid. So
right, yes.
Yes. So the parents didn't address their issues, but they put the kid in therapy. So I think that is a good thing that the younger generation, men of the younger generation, are embracing therapy. But I think men can learn from women's playbook as to how, outlets healthy ways of taking care of their emotional health.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to mention for a minute, speaking of the workplace, a very good friend of mine who is a physician was going through a divorce, and he said that as soon as word was out in the workplace that he was just somewhat bombarded by women giving him an over amount of attention and wanting to go out on dates, and he felt like he wasn't even processing his divorce. He felt like he wanted to step back and not talk about it because he didn't want to have to face that. But I say that to lead to the fact about men remarrying, and I wanted to talk about that because we know that about 64% of them will remarry within 1 to 3 years of divorce. And can you just talk about, in your experience, what is their main motivators for remarrying so quickly?
And if you had to finish that statement, you would say the percentage of the second marriages,
yes,
divorce of the second marriage is even much higher.
It is much higher, yeah.
And the reason is because, like you say, first of all, whoever the physician who talked to you is right, because for whatever reason, there are women can be vultures.
Yes. That's a good way of saying it.
that is what it is.
That's what he felt like, truthfully.
That's what it is. You have women who would attend the funeral of another woman,
yes.
not because they are there to mourn. They are there for her husband.
Right.
He's available, and they're not even going to give him the space to even bury the wife and figure out his life without the wife. Same thing with a divorce, and women sometimes don't even have respect for the marriage. They would want you while you're still married and your marriage is good,
Yes.
And sometimes it's your best friend, So that is not unusual. So what men need to know is this information, what women are up to, and not every woman that is giving you attention is good attention. First of all, anybody that wants you in that vulnerable state is not good for you. Because if they knew any better and they wanted what was good for you, they would allow you to heal. They would allow you to find your new self and your true self and be comfortable with who you are before getting into a relationship. Mm-hmm. A lot of men don't know that because they don't know how to be alone. They don't know how to be in that space. They need somebody to care for them and nurture them and heal their wound, but they don't also know that it's not going to lead to a good relationship. Mm-hmm. So women can be vultures, that is true. And women can take advantage of a situation and because they know you would easily fall prey to them because you are needy. And you never want anybody that's needy, right?
Right. Yeah.
You want.
Yeah, that's very true. And I would imagine in some respects it's flattering for some men that, suddenly they're overwhelmed with all these beautiful women, and that strokes their ego and they're flattered by that and they somewhat fall prey.
Yep, and it's the wrong kind of attention.
Right.
We tell women sometimes, you're seeking the wrong kind of attention by your behavior. Yes, you get all these men flatter you, but it's the wrong kind of man. Same too for men, it's the opposite, but having all these women, it's not the right kind of women, And when people see that a man is available and has power, it's seductive, especially if you're a professional man. So they see you're
Yes.
professional, you're good looking, and they don't think, well, why is it going to be any different for you if, that didn't work in his relationship before? He needs to figure that out, and he cannot figure that out with you in the picture.
Right. I know.
So-
I always thought I would never want to be the next one, when they're, it's like they haven't figured out what went wrong the first time yet. You don't want to just fall into line and just be the second one that's in that same type of relationship with that person. Doesn't make sense.
And I
Yeah.
tell the women a lot of times, the first one is usually the experiment. You're just
Right.
there. Yeah. But anyway, but for the men, they need to know that they need space. They need space by themselves, process the grief, grow, know what the lessons are, because irrespective of who filed for the divorce, you need to know what your contribution was
Yeah, absolutely.
to that, and it may not be a bad contribution. It may not be that you did something bad. You might have done all you thought was right and noble, but again, as far as that relationship was concerned, that was not a good thing for that relationship.
Yeah.
So you might have been overly generous to somebody who didn't want your generosity. They just, with your gifts and all of that, they wanted your presence. So nothing wrong in giving gifts, but you didn't pay attention that in this relationship, what was needed was presence.
Mm-hmm.
Your physical presence. So you need to find out and every relationship has its own language and needs.
Yeah, Dr. Atanga, I find it a little ironic that the advice that men give their friends is go out and sleep with as many women as you can, and then the women's approach are they're vultures and they're trying to attack the poor guy. No wonder. No wonder. But as you said, the most difficult question we have to ask ourselves is, what role did I play in this marriage ending? And for me, that was the most difficult question to answer in order to be able to start healing and to start discovering what type of person that I was and wanted to be going forward if I were ever to be in another relationship.
Yeah, it is important, and because the only person you can control is you. And so if you don't know who you are, and relationships, any relationship is an opportunity for growth. That's why people who isolate themselves tend not to make good relationships or interpersonal skills, because other people challenge you and reflect back who you are to you. So relationships, whether it lasts 30 years or whether it ends, it's an opportunity for growth. So you need to take time to assess that. And sometimes with the help, you need a therapist or somebody else. One thing I would add here for men in particular is, when you want to move into that next relationship and everybody says, don't do it, listen. Because I've had situations in, the men I work with where a spouse either dies or they're going through a divorce and they are smitten by this person, and usually it is somebody that they have known for a long time, whether it's a coworker, whether it's their wife's friends or things like that. So they confuse that. Like I say, anybody who wants to jump in bed with you or in a relationship or a marriage in that time is taking advantage of your vulnerability. And so a lot of times they would say, oh, my family, my kids, everybody said I should have listened, especially when it starts going sour. So what I would say is everybody cannot be 100% wrong. And so if everybody is saying do not marry that person, give it time. You don't have to rush into it. Just give it time and you would find out for yourself.
Yeah, listen and pay attention to the red flags. So that's great. Well, Dr. Atanga, I'm going to switch gears here and talk about some personal questions. In your years of working with people, is there a person or whose story has particularly moved you?
Wow, many. Let me see. I think the one I'm going to share is the one that I don't know how it ended. And this was not a silver person. So I did, as part of my, awareness, I had this radio program that I would record from my house in Michigan, and I donated to the national television in Cameroon. And that broadcast went to different countries, surrounding countries. And I would get letters, because I did share my email, and I would get letters from people how, the content helped them. We're talking, this is in the early 2000s. And I got an email from a young person in Nigeria that I was worried about. I was worried that this person might have been on the verge of something. And I immediately responded with some, seek out some, we don't have 911 or numbers like that you can call. But it was an email that made me wonder what was going on with this person. And I responded immediately and never heard from them again.
Oh.
So that is one thing that I always wonder how that ended. Or it may just, and sometimes some people just don't want to be identified. They don't want to be, they don't want you to engage. So I just hope that they just decided that, I don't want to talk again.
Right. You help them, and hopefully they're doing well.
Yeah. But I think the ones that really stand out, and I think if in my book I dedicated that, I think everybody's story is unique. I think it was just an honor and privilege every time any man opened up to me. And without them, I would not be doing what I'm doing now. And so I just love when they leave feeling better that, oh, you listened to me, or thank you for the advice. Actually, the one that recently, so we're talking about silver, this was a patient that I met for the first time. And I did something I thought about what my father used to do, and he would teach, he always taught people and would talk about patience, tolerance, vigilance, your love, just those good affirmations. And a lot of times he would talk about people would come back to him and say, thank you. The day you stopped me and talked to me, I was actually thinking of suicide.
Oh, my.
And I had this patient, I retired last year. So this was actually the last year before I retired. And it was the first, so I was seeing this person as the first time. And they were in so much distress. And it was, family distress, children. You just felt like this person is, like they are helpless and at the verge of something. And as you know, we screen for suicide, right? And based on how you answer those questions. But people who have been screened multiple times, they will not answer the questions the right way just because of the outcome. They don't want the crisis and then being hospitalized. And I thought of, what can I do for this person? And I had cards that I would write notes on. And I pulled out a card and I wrote on it, like while he was in the office, and I said, no matter what is going on, I want you to know that you are loved, because I think he was disconnected from their children. And I just wrote just a note about, you are loved, and I want you to remember this every day, that if nobody else loves you, God loves you. Yeah. I put it in the envelope and I gave it to him. And I said, this is for you. This is my prescription for you today.
And that's wonderful.
And I told him, I said, if you want to open it, you can open it. And he opened it and he read it and he left. And, I didn't remember. So the next time I saw them, they thanked me for that note and they said, I have it on my refrigerator.
Oh, gosh. You just
So
don't know what small words can how it
yeah,
can impact somebody.
yeah.
That's
So
remarkable.
we have systems in place, but it doesn't catch everything. And sometimes when you have a gut feeling, you have to just have some creative ways of, trying things, and it helps. But it really, yeah, that is the most recent one that I can think I do. And I didn't even remember, like when I saw them the second time, I didn't remember. So they brought it up and then made reference to the note. And then I remembered and I was like, okay.
Oh gosh, that's very touching. Very touching. Who's inspiring you today? You're out there inspiring so many and encouraging men all over to really embrace leadership. But who's inspiring you?
Oh, lots of people. I spend a lot of time listening to people's stories. And I think I will not go one sentence without talking about my parents. I grew up trying to hide from my last name. Just because when you grow up in a community where your parents are prominent people in the society, as far as, in the church community, political community, and people know you by your last name and they don't know your first name, and the expectations that come with, you're always introduced as the daughter of, the sister of. And we grow up, we want to have identity. And I think even coming to the United States, I could have returned to Cameroon. I would have definitely had a job. And I just wanted to find my own path because I didn't want to be daughter of, sister of. I wanted to be Bernadette. But as I grow up now and I realize that everything I learned out there, as far as lessons, philosophy, motivation, I got it at home. And I realized the work that I'm doing, and I think if you read the intro to my book, it's still following the guiding principles of my parents. Mm-hmm. And the work that we are doing, this mission work, is part of what we had decided for them as their 50th anniversary, as a gift, because they taught us community service and things like that. So they continue even in death. My mom died almost 3 years ago, come July. And my sister and I, we still talk about, this is what, when something happens, this is what mom would say, or this is what dad would say. So on that regard, they inspire me. I was privileged, and I know that's a word people don't like to use, but I say they taught us to embrace our privilege and realize that people do not have what we have, and use what you have to better the world. And so when we have, life is full of challenges, and I've had my share, but how you go through that is by embracing the fact that you are privileged, at least in my case, the privileges that we have, whether it's financial privilege, the privilege of having the parents that we have, that empowered us, in my case, empowered me as a woman, empowered me to stand strong by myself, empowered me to look at the world, to travel the world and learn the tools that help you go through whatever it is that you're going through in a healthy way. To me, that is a privilege. Because for a lot of people, it's not that you do not have problems. What makes the difference between one and the other is whether you have the tools in your toolbox to navigate those problems in a healthy way. And I was given all those tools, and I don't take that for granted.
Leadership really does start at home. That's remarkable. Thank you. Well, I have had a great conversation, and I thank you for joining me today, Dr. Atanga. It has been delightful. Would you share with our listeners how they may follow you, get in touch with you, where we may find your book?
Yes. So the book is on Amazon. So if you do Beneath the Armor and then my last name, Atanga, you will get that. And it is 8 practical strategies for men to embrace vulnerability and lead with authentic strength. It is a book for everybody. So it's not, even though it said men, it's just that the cases in there are men, but the stories are everybody's story, and it is men in relationship to women, in relationship to children, in relationship to the workplace. So you can get that on Amazon. For those listening that may want me to come speak in their corporations or want to buy in bulk, you can get that directly through my website, which is www.atangamd.com. So www.ata, so Apple, Texas, Apple, Nevada, Georgia, Apple, Maryland, Denver.com. And then you can be, I am on LinkedIn and I'm on Facebook. And there is the Facebook community, which is the Beneath the Armor Facebook community, where you have to request to join. And so you can just go to Beneath the Armor and then join that. And again, I mentioned my Instagram, which is at Atanga BMD, and the website again is atangamd.com.
All right. Well, thank you. And I will put all of those in the show notes so people can easily find it. And I do appreciate your time. I think this is going to be valuable for our listeners. Thank you so much. Please join me on the next episode of the Silver Divorce Podcast. I also ask you to do me a favor and please follow this show and share it with people you know who are going through divorce. I'd love to hear from you at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com. This podcast is brought to you by our title sponsor, the Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics, and show sponsor, Medicare Misty. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is the area's leading provider of multi-specialty orthopedic care. Using innovative surgical techniques and technologies, our team of specialists deliver exceptional results backed by exceptional patient care. Learn more at sportmed.com. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at medicaremisty.com. Whether you are considering divorce or maybe you're newly in the divorce process, we'll help you on your journey and tell you things your attorney might not tell you. Until next time, remember, divorce, it's just one event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa, and I'll see you next time.